So here we are in the main worship space of the church. And probably the first thing you noticed when you arrived on the property was that this doesn't even look like a church. And that's because...
Meet Roberto Chiotti, Toronto architect and eco-theologian. Chiotti is in the midst of conducting a tour of his favorite project to date, the design and construction of a new church building for the Parish of St. Gabriel's in Willowdale, Ontario.
Instead of the traditional peaked roof and steeple, what you have as the iconic features of the church are the garden, the projecting canopy, and the south-facing wall-to-wall, floor-to-ceiling glass. So whereas a traditional church would use stained glass to shut out the outside world, to create an otherworldly environment, to connect one with the transcendent God, St. Gabriel's is taking into account that when we're gathering to worship, we're actually doing so within that greater context of creation and that sense of the earth as that primary source of divine revelation.
St. Gabriel's is a LEED Gold project, meaning that it models the building industry's gold standard of sustainability as defined by LEED, a worldwide organization begun in the US and now headquartered in Toronto.
We are the first worship space in Canada to achieve that designation, and we were also the first LEED Gold building in Toronto and received the 2007 Toronto Green Design Award as a response to that achievement.
For Roberto Chiotti, the LEED Gold designation for St. Gabriel's was only part of what he aimed to achieve. Chiotti is a Master of Theology graduate from the Elliott Allen Institute for Theology and Ecology at University of St. Michael's College. The institute, founded in 1991, builds on the ideas of famed eco-theologian Father Thomas Berry, a Passionist priest formerly based in New York, and a collaborator with scientists like mathematical cosmologist Brian Swimme.
So Thomas Berry would say that the reason why we are facing the ecological challenges that we are today is simply that we're kind of between stories. The old story established that it was only humans that had souls, so ultimately everything else was just matter, and in fact didn't matter. So that empowered us as humans to exploit the earth for the benefit of humankind, and exploited it to the point where we are now having detrimental effects on the very systems that support life here on the planet.
Thomas Berry, the theologian, and Brian Swimme, the scientist, co-wrote The Universe Story as a statement of a new sense of the sacred that builds on the revelations of science and declares a new relationship for humans and the natural world from which they are derived. For Roberto Chiotti, St. Gabriel's would be an expression and indeed a teacher of how science and theology can come together in a building that would be both green and sacred.
When it came to designing St. Gabriel's, we knew we had to design sustainably. We knew we had to design a building that would be in and of itself a form of catechesis to give not only a tangible expression of Thomas's eco-theology, but also be an opportunity for pedagogy, for teaching that to others. So Thomas Berry would say that the laws of cosmogenesis are very simple, the way in which the universe works. Three things. First is differentiation. In other words, the universe as it's evolved has become more complex over time. The second is the law of subjectivity or interiority. So a tree subjectivity is tree subjectivity. Human subjectivity is human subjectivity. The universe is not an object or something with objects in it. The universe is alive and is a community of subjects. Thirdly is the sense of communion, that somehow we are all interrelated and everything we do has a profound influence on what goes on in the rest of the universe. So as designers, anything that continues to contribute to differentiation and complexity, the sense of subjectivity and interiority, or the sense of interrelatedness and interdependence of everything on everything else, is good design. Everything that contradicts those three principles is bad design. Okay?
The Canadian Passionists introduced Thomas Berry to fledgling Canadian theologians like Quixote over a period of 20 years. They helped to found the Institute of Theology and Ecology. It was only natural that when it came time to rebuild the Passionist-run parish St. Gabriel's, they would turn to architect-theologian Roberto Quixote. It would be another opportunity for the Passionists to go on teaching Thomas Berry's ideas about how human inventiveness can enhance the planet rather than harm it.
Just thank you for the tour. Very interesting.
People in wheelchairs would feel very comfortable in this environment. It's a very nice design.
What I'm hoping is that the students come away with that understanding of inclusivity is beyond just the human community in all its diversity, but also in the entire Earth community in all its diversity.
I'm interested in how you are inspired, like when you're designing buildings like this. Like, what's your inspiration?
My inspiration is the Earth and all that I can learn from the Earth, right? So in fact, the whole displacement ventilation here is based on natural convection currents, the way the Earth ventilates itself, right? So when Thomas Berry spoke to his fellow Passionists and delivered his message of eco-theology, they responded with, okay, so how do we respond to that? And instead of giving them an answer, he responded with the question, how will you address the sun?
As a green space, the church is built on a north-south axis, with the whole south face of the worship space oriented towards the sun in a way that enables the use of the sun's energy from the fall equinox to the spring equinox. The projecting canopy crowning the southern wall of the church allows the sun's heat into the interior when the sun is lower in the sky, and the heat is absorbed by the concrete floor and walls. In the summer, the canopy is designed to prevent the sun's energy from entering the church.
So it's a beautifully simple, non-technological solution that just basically relates to the movement of the sun.
The sun is also the church artist, every day collaborating with specially designed colored glass to put on a show that is both dazzling and a reminder of the sacredness of creation.
So the concrete becomes a neutral palette for those colors to playfully move around the space. So depending on the time of year, the inclination of the sun, the weather conditions, whether it's sunny or cloudy or raining, there's going to be a different dynamic in that space. And it's a very exciting way of decorating a church. You'll notice that the light behind me is moving down the wall. And it moves at the rate at which the Earth is spinning on its axis as it travels around the sun. So again, it puts us in touch with cosmic time. So really what you're looking at is stained glass on a cosmic level. Every Mass is going to be a different experience because of that dynamic play of light.
As a LEED Gold building, St. Gabriel's has become a teacher to students with a professional interest in the environmental sciences. Everything from the way the church humidifies and dehumidifies through a tropical plant garden called a living wall, to the way the air circulates throughout the church, has been planned to make the church work with the environment rather than against it.
Buildings produce 40% of all greenhouse gases. That's fairly significant into the whole issue of climate change and global warming. And yet, we do have the technologies available to us to actually create carbon neutral buildings, meaning ones that, buildings that actually absorb carbon. So we designed the church to use less than 50% of the energy of a similar building designed to current code standards. Similarly, with water consumption, we were able to reduce our water consumption over a base building design of similar type by 78%. So the air that is from the rooftop units over the narthex comes down those columns in the narthex, underneath the floor, and is allowed to kind of move up through the space. The floor is an access floor. It's about 15 inches above the slab that separates the church from the underground parking garage below.
Perhaps the most amazing convergence of the scientific and the sacred has to do with the green space of the church and its relationship to the church's underground parking, another first for Toronto churches.
Traditionally, the churches we design for the Archdiocese of Toronto in the suburban areas require a minimum of 6 acres, and that's simply because you require so much parking. St. Gabriel's uses the unprecedented decision to place 2/3 of its parking underground. That frees up 50% of the site of the church given over to landscape, which essentially becomes a green roof above the underground parking.
Church parking lots, along with all the other parking lots, sidewalks, and roads, create heat islands in the summer, contributing to nighttime heat and additional burdens for air conditioners. St. Gabriel's green space instead contributes to the area's nightly cooling off.
It also was designed to reflect the natural landscape that would have existed here. So we have a beech forest, we have the oak savanna, we have natural meadows. These are all elements that would have been part of the landscape prior to the church being built here. Finally, the garden represents a whole other way of understanding Christ's presence, the sort of the sense of the cosmic Christ as, according to John's Gospel, as that helpmate in the creation of the universe. So we're offered here a meditation. Scientists remind us that we are precipitating a vast extinction of the abundance and variety of the web of life. Thomas Berry highlights the religious dimension of the crisis. To wantonly destroy a living species is to silence forever a divine voice.
The Passionists of St. Gabriel's Parish, in creating Earth meditation stations, are asking parishioners to reflect on the entire story of God's creation and how humans are capable of condemning it to die, not only putting in peril the Earth's plants, animals, air, and water, but also the very existence of humans themselves. But they are also capable of finding ways to cooperate with it, participating in its resurrection.
So this station gives insight into how we can understand the nature of the cross in its current context. And it kind of establishes the rationale and the starting point and the perspective for the stations. The cross is close to the earth and surrounded by colorful flowers, affirming that it is linked to the story of creation. The artist suggests that the space in the center of the cross hints at an open space of wondrous possibility. Although it is the symbol of suffering and death, the cross also proclaims hope and resurrection. The whole church is designed in such a way to challenge the traditional spirituality of the parishioners and to engage them in the new story in a very active way. Everything about the church actually encompasses the passion of Christ as now embodying the passion of the earth. In a sense, our human pervasive presence is resulting in the crucifixion of the earth. And also then the sense of hope of the resurrection. You know, the resurrection of Christ is a cosmic event, and the light and the colors around you give expression to that event.